Perfect. So we're at the top of the hour, bottom of the hour if you're in Newfoundland. And we'll get started with our Leading Change webinar. And today we will be talking about key learnings and advice from young founders. Just a little bit of background on myself. My name is Christina Riley, and I will be your moderator host for today. And I'm a Cleantech consultant with the Delphi Group. I have sort of a background in Cleantech, and I'm quite interested in the topic, but I'm in no way an entrepreneur, which is why we've gathered a great group of panelists who have a lot of direct experience and stories to share with us on the topic. And for a number of people on the line, today might be your first touch point with Leading Change. So you might be wondering how my organization, the Delphi Group, and Leading Change are connected, as well as connected to the Globe series, who are helping us run this platform through Globe Virtual. And essentially, we're all connected because we work as a constellation of organizations. We like to use that word, but basically, I just consider us, sister organizations, and we're separate organizations that have our own brand and mission, but we're all working on the same vision, which is to achieve a sustainable, prosperous, and socially just future within a generation. And that's us. So before officially kick things off, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. So if I could get forward on the slide deck, please. So essentially what we're trying to do with the land acknowledgement is that today we're living in a world that's trying to be sustainable and socially just. And in order to do that, we have to begin acting in a manner that's decolonial and to begin building and sustaining relationships with Indigenous peoples. And while we're all uprooted currently and working in digital spaces, it's really important to still ground ourselves, acknowledging the various territories that we're situated on. As we'll likely have participants all across Canada, maybe even internationally. And if you don't know the land or treaty that you're situated on, you could take this as an opportunity that when the session's over, that's something you could commit to learning for yourself. And if you do know the land or treaty that you are situated on, feel free to type it into the chat box so we can all see where we're situated. So I'm calling in from Calgary, which is Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot language. Calgary is located in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta, and that's the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations. It's also the home of Sioux Nation, Stoney Nakoda Nation, and it includes the Métis Nation of Region 3. And if I could get the next slide, please. We'll just go over some quick housekeeping before we get to the meat of the conversation, which is what we're all here for. So basically, right now you might be seeing us all in very small squares at the top of the screen. So take a little bit of time to maybe figure out your own screen on your system. If you look at the participant tab at the bottom, there's a little button where you can sort of select if you want to have participants or thumbnails. So feel free to move things around on your own system. We will be recording this session, so you get to hear my voice as many times as you would like. So if you have to drop out early or there's someone in your network that you heard wanted to attend but they couldn't, feel free to share the information after the session is over. As for our format, we'll be doing a facilitated dialogue with our panelists for the first 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll be looking to take audience questions. So hopefully you guys have a lot of interest in the topic and a lot of things to ask our panelists. Feel free as we're going through, if anything sparks your imagination, type a question into the chat box. Just make sure you've had it set to all participants so everyone can read what your question is. if you're having tech issues as well, feel free to type that into the chat and we'll attempt to field any issues that we're having. And yeah, in general, just feel free to chat with each other in the chat box. If you agree with something, if you have your own tips or stories, feel free. This is definitely an open and engaging dialogue with everyone that we're trying to have. And with that, I think you've heard from me quite enough. So I'll look to get our panelists to introduce themselves. So we'll go alphabetical, so Poor, then Bo, Kelsey, and Richard. And if each of you could just tell us your name, where you're calling in from, what your current title or role is at the organization you're affiliated with, the tech that your company is working on, and the overall impact that you think that that's bringing either environmentally or socially, as well as why you're excited to be part of the conversation today. So Poor, I'll let you kick it off.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Christine. My name is Apoorv Sinha. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta as well. I didn't realize Christine was here. So I serve as the CEO and co-founder of Carbon Upcycling. We're a 5.5-year-old carbon utilization company that's scaling and validating a process for converting carbon emissions into solid products. Primarily looking at turning waste into new materials that can make construction, plastics, and a range of other industries more sustainable.
Awesome. Perfect. Bo? Oh, Bo, I think you're on mute.
That's right. Hi, everyone. My name is Bo Simongo, and I'm calling from St. John's, Newfoundland. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Aquafort, and what we are developing is AI-powered predictive analytics platform for the finfish aquaculture industry. And what we're trying to do with this is to help producers predict and identify environmental and production risk factors, including automating production processes such as environmental condition monitoring, fish health and welfare, and the overall purpose is to help facilitate sustainable aquaculture.
Perfect. Kelsey?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Miller-Anderson. I'm in Calgary as well. So I'm currently actually working on my second venture, which is Bumble Chain. What we're doing with Bumble Chain is actually working to use blockchain as a base to introduce new supply chain tools into the honey industry in order to help beekeepers sort of earn a fair price for their honey, as well as stop the international honey fraud. So overall, though, it's a social venture, really with the aim to reinvest into other researchers and nonprofits in order to uplift global bee populations. Yeah, so that's what I'm working on now.
Great. Very interesting mashup. And certainly not least, Richard.
Yeah, also not youngest. I'm Richard Adamson. I'm here from Calgary. My present role is CEO of Industrial Climate Solutions. In a previous role, I had the opportunity to really get a chance to see what was going on with industrial greenhouse gas solutions worldwide, especially around carbon capture, utilization and storage technologies. And I realized that there was a lot of really great work going on in terms of new solvents and new ways of doing CO2 capture, but they would never make it into the market because the industrial hardware that brought gases and liquids into contact with each other to make them work hadn't really been improved in 50 years. And the technology we're commercializing now is really, our company's been around for 3 years, but it's got a 20-year history. We're commercializing and scaling up a really innovative froth-based contactor to bring gases and liquids into contact with each other. And I could go on about that forever, but what it really does is it has the ability to dramatically reduce the size and the cost of CO2 capture to take emissions out of industrial processes.
Great. So clearly, just from you guys doing your intros, we can see what a broad spectrum clean tech can really, encapsulate. It can be so many different things and cover so many different sectors. So You guys definitely have a lot of diversity of sectors and stories for us today. So really excited to get into the questions. So can I get the next slide up, please? Thank you. So the first question that we want to cover today is really about kind of how you got your start in entrepreneurship. You know, have you always wanted to be an entrepreneur? When did you first realize that this could be a potential career path for you? And what made you want to start your own venture? Because I think, you know, at least for myself, when I came out of university, I mean, I heard the word entrepreneur, entrepreneurship, didn't really know what it meant or entailed. It was kind of a looming, scary thing. And I think that a lot of people still consider entrepreneurship to be kind of a non-traditional career path. And yeah, I'd be really interested to hear from each of you kind of how you got on that pathway and why you continue to stay on it. Richard, if you want to kick us off with this one.
Yeah, sure. So I've been passionate about moving technology off the lab bench and into the marketplace my whole career since I left university a long time ago. I never wanted to become an entrepreneur. It was the last thing I wanted to do. Was involved in a number of startup, either as a co-founder or as a member of the team, but I didn't want to be the guy out in the front, you know, the guy with the arrows in the back. I just really cared about moving the technology out there. But it just finally became apparent to me that if anybody was going to do this, it was going to have to be me. And this technology, it struck me as being something that was really important to get out there. It could have a lot of impact, and I couldn't convince anybody else to do it. And so if it was going to get done, I was going to have to grab it and run with it. You know, I don't consider entrepreneurship to be a career path at all. You have to be crazy to do it. It takes absolutely unreasonable levels of persistence beyond what any rational person would do. If you care more about getting whatever it is that whatever mission, and this is for me, there's other people who've got other things that drive them, but to me, it's a mission-driven thing. There's something that needs to be accomplished, and this is a vehicle to get that done. It's not about, look at me, I'm an entrepreneur, or I want to be the CEO, or any of that. There's something that needs to get done, and if I don't do it, it ain't going to get done.
Yeah, definitely. You want to see that connection to a problem or a challenge that really speaks to you, that's going to drive you. Mm-hmm. Totally. Kelsey, how about yourself? How'd you get started?
So I'd say that I guess I'm pretty similar to Richard in a way. So I started when I was 15 years old. I started research towards developing natural remediation solutions for hydrocarbon contamination. So I started targeting oil contamination and tailing ponds up in northern Alberta. And by the time I was 17, just finishing high school, I had developed 2 natural methods that were very successful at remediation. And so I kind of stopped working on it. I went to university. I still kind of spoke at events, and I figured, I'm like, great, I solved the problem. That's what I set out to do. Now someone's going to like commercialize it. They're going to use it. Great. Like, I always thought I was a scientist. I loved solving problems. But I quickly realized that sometimes science gets stuck in the lab, and you can solve a problem, but nobody's actually going to use it in the real world, and it's not going to actually solve the problem. So I decided that if the technology was going to be used, I guess I was going to have to commercialize it myself. So I founded my first company, MicroRemedy, at 21 to do that. And then now I'm actually I took a bit of a break due to some health reasons from MicroRemedy. It wasn't feasible for me to be working in a lab. And so I was kind of, supposed to be resting and recovering. I was home on bed rest, and I realized that just because I was at home didn't mean that I couldn't still solve problems and be an entrepreneur. So I founded my latest company, Bumble Chain, last year around sort of addressing the fraud issues and population decline in bee populations and the fraud issues in honey, because since it's a blockchain-based technology and sort of a global problem, it's something that I could build a company and solve the problem right from the comfort of my home or even my bed. So I've realized that entrepreneurship is something that's so accessible to everybody. So yeah, I really love it.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think the way the internet works these days, there's such a global marketplace available to everybody that, like you said, it has become so much more of an accessible topic for everybody to get involved in who has an idea, for sure. And next up, Bo, how did you get your start in the world of entrepreneurship?
So my story, the story on my behalf is a little bit different, but you know, I'd always understood the time value of money, working odd jobs in my teens and then offering services. And then when I got to my undergrad, I'd always flirted with the idea of entrepreneurship, you know, but you can only read so many books, watch so many videos, and listen to so many podcasts. So two events actually happened. The first one was I lost my job in the energy sector, something that I thought would turn out to be a career. And 2 years after that, I was at a career crossroads and I wanted to calibrate my thoughts. So by circumstance, I took a trip back to Zimbabwe, my country of origin, to work on a charity project that I had planned, organized, and led. And because of the requirements of the project, I spent a lot of time in low-income areas of the city. And whilst I was there, you know, I saw people my age and younger doing a lot with very little. And, you know, I was so embarrassed because here I was in Canada for so long with so many resources and opportunities, and all I had to do was start. So after about 9 months working on that project, I came back, I returned, and I figured that I could take a chance, mostly because of limited opportunities and time. And whilst I was doing my master's, I felt I had the time to do two things at once. So in some way, I felt it was a win-win situation. If I get things right, I have a startup. And if I got things wrong, well, I'm sure I would have expanded my network, pursued something fairly consequential, traveled the world, and I would have learned something of value that perhaps I wouldn't have done if I was doing something else. And just to finish off, you know, in terms of the traits, I'm a person who doesn't like being straitjacketed, and without being too idealistic about entrepreneurship, I feel like entrepreneurship has really afforded me the autonomy, the opportunity to grow, learn, and challenge myself, and apply the knowledge or experience I accrued from working in different industries. You know, so these are things that really resonate with me. So that's my story.
Nice. I love that you were like, well, I mean, I could do this and nothing happens, no harm, no foul, or I could do this and something amazing comes out of it. And if the worst thing you can do is learn, well,
Yeah.
that's bad at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Perfect. And Apoorv, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm probably going to sound a little bit like a broken record here because I think everyone's kind of already laid out the reasons. I would probably echo a lot of what everyone said, but the most fundamental kind of driver that I've been able to reflect on is just solving a problem. I think I enjoy kind of, I guess maybe this is because I trained as an engineer through my undergrad. I guess, Bo, you did as well. And I think Richard and Kelsey are both pretty technical in their backgrounds too. So I think there is a thrill or a high you get from like solving a tough challenge. I think to what Kelsey said earlier, initially, like when I first started, my first startup was in the humanitarian space. Like I tried this when I was doing my undergrad in Atlanta, and I was looking at humanitarian logistics, and you know, I had like my blinders on. I was only looking at solving the problem in my head and convincing a few people that I knew were sticklers for detail. Once I convinced them that this thing was a go, like that to me was a win enough, I guess. But then it dawned on me that, to Kelsey's point, that till that is actually realized in the real world and actually making an impact, it doesn't really change anything. And I think that's still a lesson that I'm trying to internalize. Like with carbon upcycling, you know, the company is going to be 6 years old in 3 or 4 months. And we are beginning to have more impact on the ground. Like we're beginning to deal with real commercial players in a couple of different fields. And that's great. But I guess one long lesson, I know this is kind of going forward maybe in some of the questions you have, Christine, but one thing that I have looked at this is like you only win based on your own metrics, which is really nice. Like you actually set your own standards for success. And to Bo's point, you know, you can fail from this, but still, if you've learned a lot, you actually, you know, I did my undergrad degree at a pretty difficult school. I still have nightmares from my undergrad degree, and I still feel I learned way more and enjoyed a lot more since my undergrad was finished at work. And yeah, I think that is something that, you know, if the company was, for whatever reason, not to make it over the long term, would still be something I'd reflect on fondly.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your telling us about your pathways or how you got into entrepreneurship. If I could get the next slide up, we'll move on to the next question, which is, I guess, mostly trying to get at the idea of mentorship and networking as it relates to starting your own venture. And just understanding, I guess, what are some great pieces of advice that you guys have received, or maybe you've given some great advice along the way. And also, you know, maybe someone gave you a piece of advice that now that you're looking back on it, you're thinking, no, I definitely would not have followed that. And maybe we can prevent a few people from falling into the same traps. So Kelsey, if you want to let us know, yeah, kind of the best piece of advice and the worst piece of advice.
So I definitely have a best piece of advice. So when I first started my entrepreneurship journey, I went to a program called Next 36, which is for young founders. So I moved to Toronto and was going to start my company. It was great. And as part of that, we got to have a lot of great mentors and classes and things like that. And one of the mentors that we had, one of the things he constantly was doing was trying to make us really uncomfortable and put us in difficult situations. And the whole point of it was to really learn that when you're uncomfortable, when you feel uncomfortable, that's when you're going to learn, that's when you're going to innovate. And it's actually a really great place to be, as long as you have the mindset around, you know, I'm going to learn something from this. This is how I'm going to grow. So that really helped me in my personal life and kind of in my entrepreneurship journey, is like looking at failure in a whole new way, and where you look at it in a way that, you know, the worst that's ever going to happen is you're going to fail. And if you look at failure as this opportunity to learn something new and to grow, then it's not a waste of time at all. So I found that's been such an amazing piece of advice in everything I do day to day in work, but also just, you know, as a young person, like choosing to try entrepreneurship and kind of taking that leap. I mean, it definitely kind of echoes what was said earlier, you know, that its failure isn't a bad thing. So I think that's probably the best piece of advice. As of the worst piece of advice, I don't know. I'd say if I get really bad advice, I tend to just forget it right away. So I don't have one that sticks with me. Other than maybe when I was younger, I definitely did have quite a few people who didn't really think I was going to be able to do it. You know, like even when I started doing research with mushrooms to do remediation with the mycelium, I reached out to some researchers in the space, and, you know, a lot of people were like, no, like that's just not going to work. Like, why bother? It's not going to work. So I definitely had a lot of people who doubted me because of my age or my perceived sort of lack of knowledge or experience in the space. And so anyone, I guess that would be people who like doubt you. Again, you don't have to listen to them. Like, take their advice with a grain of salt. If they're not sort of valuing you and your opinion and your sort of potential, then you don't need to listen to what they have to say because they're not on your side. So.
Great. Well, you just gave a great piece of advice. So, and yeah, I love that yourself and Bo have already talked about how, you know, we need to, as a society, kind of flip the switch on failure. Everybody's so afraid to fail. And if we're looking at failure as an opportunity to learn and to not make the same mistakes again and to move things forward, then absolutely nothing wrong with failure. Like, it happens, learn, and then continue. And Apoorv, if you want to let us know a good piece of advice that you've received and maybe a bad piece of advice that you've received.
Yeah, the good one's really simple. I'm glad that you shared the questions beforehand, but the one that the one that came to mind right off the bat was a mentor of mine back when I was doing my undergrad, who suggested that all I really had to do in life was solve one problem. And he said if it was big enough, it didn't have to be huge, but if it was big enough, I'd have a decent life after. So that I thought was really cool, because I think, you know, and I don't know if this is just an engineer thing or just like in general, but I know right now, especially since COVID, you know, a lot of people are kind of being bombarded by information in so many different ways. And we're supposed to not only keep up with what we do for a living, but on the family front and, you know, emotionally challenged friends that need help. And on top of all of that, there's all this COVID news that keeps flooding your thing. You have no sports to track, so you've got statistics around COVID infections instead. And so, like, it just, you know, it's overwhelming. And it reminds me a little bit of undergrad, like we had, you know, 6, 7, or 8 courses in a semester, and you kind of had to make it through in all of them, even though they're so different. Within that kind of cloud of confusion, I guess, like that seemed to be very kind of laser cutting advice. Like, just look at solving one problem. And so to me, what I've realized, you know, in the 10 years since I heard that, I think, is just the importance of identifying the right problem to solve. And I think even within, you know, we all gave kind of a 1-minute pitch on what we've done or what we're doing now. I think even within that, I'm realizing that there's so many different kind of layers to that. So, you know, like in our case, like, we're not just trying to solve problems around carbon emissions and kind of closing the loop on excess carbon reaching the environment, but we're also trying to find solutions to more proximate challenges around what value proposition can we provide to one customer in one specific industry. So I think looking at that and almost, you know, getting to the root of fundamental problem and solving a real one that has some real impact, I think was really good advice. And it's something that I've been trying to reflect on over the years. In terms of bad advice, like, without getting into too much detail, like I do have people in like my acquaintances and family that I can't avoid getting really bad advice from. So I guess I'm like Kelsey, I don't have the mental fortitude to just block all of it out. So I think over time, like, it's only been in the last 5 years, but one specific individual that is related to me has convinced me multiple times to just kind of follow the normal path. And I think for one reason or another, I thought that was really terrible advice, because it wasn't really grounded in anything except to say, this is the easy, you know, the path of least resistance. There wasn't more, I guess, depth to that advice. And so even within that, like, I tend to get probably as much motivation from like bad feedback as I do from good. And so when I think back to that though, like, I think that really the thing that I took away from an advice like that was not to look at all advice the same way. You know, like, at the end of the day, especially being, I guess, a young entrepreneur, I'm sure Kelsey and Bo can relate to this. You know, the innovation ecosystem right now is flooded with a lot of advice. Like, there are mentors at every street that have done something or the other, and by no means, you know, like insubstantial things. Like, many of them have done great things. Like, Richard has had a track record of over 2 or 3 decades of working in the clean tech space. And I think being able to suss out which of that resonates with you, not necessarily what's right or wrong in black and white terms, but being able to say, this just, for whatever reason, it could be the perfect way to do this, but that's just not the way I would like to do it. And being able to stand your ground as a 20 or 30-year-old when you're dealing with people your parents' age or whatever, like, I think that's really important. And I've seen a couple of my friends that are in the startup space kind of struggle with that. So I would just say, even with, you know, just have self-awareness or build it over time to know what is bad advice, even though you might not know that off the bat.
Okay, yeah, I really like that. Don't try to solve everything at once. Like really take the time to hone in on a specific problem that you're looking to solve. So yeah, I think that's really great advice. Bo, how
Yeah,
about
I think Apurv and Kelsey have received some really good advice because it resonates with me. But on my behalf, two things stand out for me. Number one is compete in the least crowded channels, and also know that the most interesting things happen at the intersection of things. So on competing in the least crowded channels, it almost applies to our own lives as well. It extends to business strategy. You know, for myself, just looking back in my life over the last 5 years in particular, I've worked in a number of different fields, from Arctic vessel research and development to mining to oil and gas and into healthcare. And looking back, there were a number of times when I had always wanted to have a linear career path. I think Apoorv mentioned that as well. Something that made conventional sense, you know, a nice linear career trajectory, which was odd because I was finding something guarded in a highly dynamic world. So at that time, I was fretting about going down a particular path, and I had some wonderful people who said, "Listen, you're going to learn something new. You'll be known for going where no one has ventured, and think about what you'll discover and learn." So also on the part of when you compete in the least crowded channels, and if you execute well, you have a significant opportunity to have a lion's share of whatever it is you're pursuing. You know, and in some way you end up like learning that it's better to risk boldness than triviality. And in business theory, in terms of competing in the least crowded channels, they call it blue ocean strategy. As for the worst piece of advice, Apurva and Kelsey put it well. I had some people tell me not to try something different and not attempt to start a startup. You know, and it came from people who'd never done anything remotely close to some extent. And what they were inadvertently telling me was to lower my goals and expectations. And I think the key lesson from all of that is that never let anyone make a decision for you. You know, just sort of pursue your own or chart your own trajectory, essentially.
Mm-hmm. That, Richard, give us all your sage wisdom.
Oh, we don't have enough time. No, early on, one of the things that I used to get really frustrated with was I would be given a problem to solve, and the solution would be obvious, and I'd get really frustrated because the person who had the problem just wouldn't get why this would work. They would go off and try, and maybe it was because I was young and they decided I wasn't credible or something. But then one of the guys that I was working with, a mentor of mine, turned to me and said, "Richard, what's clear to you is really clear to you." And that the responsibility for communication is mine. If the other guy doesn't get it, I've failed. It's not the other guy's fault. And that's always been something that I carry with me. It's really important to realize that it's my job, not the other guy's job to understand. It's my job to get the other guy to understand. Mm-hmm. So that was a classic, really good piece of advice. A recent learning, I would say, around taking advice, and it's very much in line with what everybody else has said around not taking bad advice. But a way to recognize the bad advice is look at the experience. The person who's giving you advice may have made lots of money. They may have been very successful in their field, but look at what you're trying to accomplish and what they're doing. And if it's not in the same space, they're no better than somebody who just walked in off the street, a random person off the street. So if in my case, we're trying to commercialize industrial process equipment, having somebody who made a bundle of money on a cell phone app tell me how to run this business doesn't do me any good. And similarly, when you're looking at accelerator programs and things, the customers for accelerator programs, I'm sorry to tell you, is not the entrepreneur. The customer for this accelerator program is the investors, not the entrepreneurs. And so accelerator programs will tend to try and get entrepreneurs to conform to what their customers like. So if you're going to look at going to an accelerator program, look at who their investors are and what their investors invest in. And if their investors aren't aligned with what you're trying to do, you're likely to get bad advice from the accelerator, because they're going to try and make you look like what their customers want to buy, not what will succeed, help you succeed. So that's probably the package.
No, very interesting on that last point about the accelerator customer. I never thought about it that way before. And great advice on the communication being your responsibility. As an engineer, and I know there are a few engineers on this call, I know we struggle with that. Next slide, please, and we'll get question 3 rolling. So with this question, basically, if you could tell us, through a previous startup journey or the one that you're currently on, what are some great things that you experienced as part of the Cleantech network or ecosystem, and the great features that it has to offer entrepreneurs who are looking to get started with a venture? And Bo, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for myself, I just pivoted from working on predictive climate risk analytics for the insurance, property and casualty insurance, to ocean tech. So there are a few things that I've learned so far that are, still ringing in my mind. On the macro level, we are lucky to have institutional backing that supports entrepreneurship. I know the government ministers, Navdeep Bains, Mary Ang, Melanie Jolie, they're quite active in this space. And then we also have, just underneath that, a tertiary education system that has established these sort of clusters of learning around entrepreneurship. I'd almost say that every university has a center of entrepreneurship, and then also almost every city has independently run incubators like CDL, DMZ, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And even though there's not a lot of talk about the 5 clusters, super clusters of innovation that have been established, I do think they have a profound impact in supporting and encouraging entrepreneurial culture. And then also, I think that the Cleantech ecosystem in Canada, relative to Nordic countries like Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, I think our Canadian ecosystem has quite a lot of room to expand, which offers a lot of opportunities and room for growth. So if we look at some of the key industries in our own economy, you've got mining, you have oil and gas, you have utilities and agriculture. And I feel that the presence of these industries offer opportunities to innovate within, but with the right corporate innovation programs. So it's also worth noting that if you're keen to work in this space, make sure you identify the right partners with the right innovation spirit, who are relatively risk aware, but not completely averse to pilot projects and things of that nature, because you dive very fast. And then on the micro level, I also feel that from a tech skills perspective, we have access to this, highly skilled labor with domain knowledge and experience. I mean, Richard has a 30-year career, and people like this can help you refine an idea from, is it rational, to logical application in the business value chain. And since we're here, Christine and the rest of the audience, we have forums like Leading Change and Delta Management and then Globe Series, which offer an environment to participate, to be recognized, to engage, and then also like to learn from people in the Cleantech ecosystem. And I only joined Leading Change, the first time was the February event. And to a certain degree, you end up learning that there are no maps for these territories, but you can find guides along the way. So if you're from the outside looking in, you learn something. And if you're from the inside, you're going to have opportunities to grow. And then on the final piece, in terms of funding, I think Richard is probably the expert on this panel and may have more insight in terms of how investor funding has evolved over time. But from what I've seen so far and learned from speaking to different people, I think there seems to be a growing willingness from funding stakeholders to learn how to change and improve to close gaps, address needs, and take proactive approaches to support founders. So I think forums like Globe Capital next year, some of those potential environments. Yeah, so
great.
That's my observation.
You have a lot of observations for your short amount of time in the clean tech sphere. And Apoorv, how about yourself? What's new and interesting for clean tech entrepreneurs these days?
I would agree with everything that's been said so far. I would just add that I think there is a a big social change that's at play as well. And it's hard to say exactly how that's going to play out. There's obviously been a lot of focus on the pandemic and what it's shown about society, I guess, more so in the States than in Canada. I think it's brought up some really interesting things about how the US works, but all across the world, I think people are re-exploring or re-investigating how things have been built in the past. Everything from international supply chains to how policy is being made. And more recently, I guess since the urgency mode on the COVID crisis has passed, there's more and more discussion about how do we get out of this in a better shape than where we were before. And a lot of discussions have started, at least that we're, I guess, relatively informed on, both in North America as well as in Europe and Asia, about kind of using green projects to kickstart the economy, and the government using those kind of, I guess, events or shovel-ready projects to pump money back into, getting people back to work and things like that. So I think that is a pretty interesting inflection point, potentially anyway, to see how some of the technology companies that are kind of ready to take advantage of that can really leverage this to leapfrog ahead of the competition. I think in some cases, for earlier stage technologies, it might be more challenging to maybe take advantage of this, but hopefully systemically policymakers keep that in mind, because this could be a place where there's a level change and all types of kind of sustainability related innovation is pushed forward. So like there's a wave that just takes everyone up. There's always, I guess, the risk that instead what it'll do is, some of the companies that were already kind of ahead of the line, they just get an extra bump and either absorb the competition or just get rid of it. But I see a lot of potential at this point. Maybe in a year's time, it's all played out in a way that I'm not so happy about. But I would say that at this time it's pretty promising. And overall, I do agree that there's probably more ecosystem help now than there's ever been for a clean tech entrepreneur. I would go back again, though, to one of the issues that come with that, which is just abundance of advice and being able to, sort through that to get the right thing. Sometimes too much of a good thing is not good. And I do think that at least I often feel pressure. Like if I think about, starting a company today, like if I was to go back in time and it was today, I think I'd be extremely conflicted about, all the different, even startups just within Calgary that have popped up that could all offer, meaningful pieces, but having to pick and choose and try to pick from the options on the table sometimes can almost paralyze you into inaction as opposed to really enable you. So I'm hoping that kind of becomes more consolidated moving forward.
Yeah, no, fair enough. As yourself and Bo mentioned, almost every university has an innovation hub now, and that's changed even from when I went through university, 5 or 6 years ago. And also I really agree that this could be a cusp of kind of a game changer to see what comes out of the pandemic, and whether or not we're going to leapfrog all of our infrastructure to be climate adaptation or mitigation focused. Will be really interesting the next few months to see what gets announced. Richard, any thoughts on what's new in the clean tech world? Oh,
maybe if I unmute, it'll work better. There's a few things that are particularly good. First off, for an entrepreneur getting into this space, identify communities and networks that you can connect into, because networking is everything. And you'll find that if you find a community that you can work with that are sort of in a related space, then a lot of the time when you're up against a wall or you can talk to somebody and they may not have the answer, but they'll know who you should talk to about it or whatever. So I know in Calgary, there's the Calgary Biomass Users Guild, there's ACTIA, the Alberta Clean Tech Innovation Alliance, there's the Rainforest group. All of them have got slightly different types of communities around the innovation space. Some of them are more specifically clean tech than others, but having a community of people is really important. And the other thing is, if you can find at least one sort of CEO level mentor that you don't need anything from, that you can connect with, somebody you can sit down and say, the whole world is falling apart. I don't know what the heck I'm going to do next, because as CEO, you're stuck with, you're the face of the company. And so everybody you talk to might be an investor, a customer, a critical person. And so you don't have the freedom to express when it's all gone for shit. So you need somebody you can talk to, you can hash that stuff through with. Because you can't just do it with anybody. And a lot of people, they may be willing to listen, but they don't get it. So you really need somebody who's been through it that you can talk to. So anyway, that was more advice than, but it is ecosystem related. The other thing is, it used to be that you talk about the Alberta ecosystem, and then maybe the Western Canadian ecosystem, and then maybe Canada, and then really right now, and especially with this kind of technology that we're on right now, everything's global, and they're global right out of the gate. You know, you may have local resources you can tie into. There are great funding programs, terrific funding programs, especially at the R&D level and the sort of early stage level in Canada. Harder as you get up the ladder, but really, market, it used to be the old school approach was, you know, you find a couple of customers in Alberta and you work your stuff out with the customers in Alberta, and then you try and find some more Canadian customers, and then you sort of take a deep breath and leap across the border into the US, and now you're international. And then but that ain't the way the world works now. Your first customer might be in Austria, or India, or wherever. So you need to be sort of immediately thinking on a global basis out of the box. But the networks that are out there work that way now. You can tie into UK networks or German networks or Norwegian networks or whatever, and leverage that. So the ecosystem, it's a whole world now. It's not just Southern Alberta or something like that.
Great. Yeah, definitely agree that there's so many like broad communities and networks that entrepreneurs can tap into, and you could be, you know, meeting with someone halfway across the world on a regular basis. Now that we've gone through this pandemic and nobody needs to see each other face to face anymore, then we know that works well for sure. Last, but certainly not least, Kelsey, what do you see happening?
Yeah. So I'd say, Richard, that's a great lead into kind of what I wanted to talk about, is that think globally. Like, all of the problems that we're trying to address with clean tech and in this industry, they're not local problems, they're global problems. They impact the entire world. So I know with me, on this latest venture, we were gonna start in New Zealand and China. Obviously things got turned on their head with everything going on with the pandemic. So then we pivoted and we were gonna start in Canada. And, you know, I became quite passionate about how I was gonna help Canadian beekeepers thrive, and, you know, how I was gonna solve a problem here at home. But it didn't make sense, and I had to pivot away from the Canadian market. And at first I was really upset. I kind of felt like it was a personal failure. I felt, you know, I should be doing this in Canada. But then I realized, well, you know what? Bee populations and the impact of pollination on climate change and global agriculture and feeding a planet, all of those things are global. And it doesn't matter, you know, where sort of the boundaries of a country are. If I'm going to be able to make more impact starting somewhere else, that's what I should do, because I should focus on the impact I can make rather than necessarily, you know, sort of those ties that we feel to one certain space or place. So that would kind of be my big tip is, these things are so global and there's so many amazing global networks. I mean, with this latest startup, that's kind of what I've tried to do, is sort of leverage those international opportunities right away. And I mean, we've just we're in our second sort of international cohort of clean tech and ag tech startups. And so being the one sort of Canadian company, we're able to work with companies from all over the world who have different resources, different sort of viewpoints and technologies. And by kind of leveraging each other's networks and the knowledge that we have, I think it's going to allow us to grow a lot quicker. So I would never kind of like pigeonhole yourself with like saying you're going to start in one place. Try to think global right off the bat and look at the resources available. There's so much out there, especially if I'm assuming correctly that a lot of the people on the call are younger entrepreneurs. There's a ton of resources for under 30 entrepreneurs and under 35 entrepreneurs, and people who just want to help you succeed. So look for those resources.
Awesome. I love that. Focus on your overall impact and don't necessarily be tied down to a specific geography. Everything adds up, no matter where you're making the impact. And next slide, please. So this next question is just going to be a quick lightning round to get everybody's synapses firing before we move into the audience Q&A. So I would just ask each of you, kind of, when you think about game-changing technologies for society overall, what's something that really interests you and you can't wait to see, make it to the market? And Bo, how about yourself? What do you want to see developed? Oh, mute.
All right, second go. In terms of game changers, I hope to see advancements in carbon nanomaterials and material science for disaster resilient infrastructure, because extreme weather events are becoming more prominent. And we've got people from Calgary. So we just saw floods in Calgary just last month. And annually, when you look at annually due to global natural disasters, we're looking at you're losing on average 60,000 lives, I think $225 billion, and it often takes about 16 months to recover from these natural disasters. So it'll be great to find some way of having resistant materials and to mitigate losses and the long-term impact of the global economy.
Awesome. Yep, carbon fiber is a good one to unlock. Richard.
Yeah, so it isn't a technology. It's a way of thinking that I think is really most exciting. I'm very focused on the industrial side, carbon capture and storage and utilization. Those things have been, and hydrogen and stuff, those things are things that have been demonstrated as a project. Here's a source, we're going to capture the CO2, here's a pipe, we're going to put it in the hole in the ground. That's a project, let's move on. What we really need is carbon management systems where we integrate entire regional gathering and carbon management systems, or hydrogen systems with carbon storage and that sort of thing, where it's an entire regional integrated system for reducing the overall carbon from the whole regional industrial approach. So I'm really looking, what I'm excited by is moving from here's a cool technology, here's a cool project, to how do we put together a regional solution or a package that integrates and closes the loops and works across a whole cluster of different emission sources or industrial sources or that sort of thing.
Kelsey, what excites you? What do you want to see on the marketplace?
Yeah, I love what Richard said sort of about, it's going to be, we need entire systems in order to solve these problems. Obviously, right now, I'm kind of working more in the ag tech space, but a lot of carbon emissions come from the production of food. And I think in this space in particular, one of the things that's really going to sort of drive innovation and allow us to make a lot of change is sort of bringing the entire system online, and sort of the integration of IoT and blockchain and AI in order to really help us make sustainable choices and just overall like the management of our supply chains and things like that. So I think introducing those technologies into the agricultural system is going to have huge impacts.
Awesome. And Apoorv.
I'd probably play off of what Richard said as well. I think I would almost want to see something around education change quite a lot, because a lot of us talked about some of the
In the tech world.
Yeah, not just in the technology component though, but the overall delivery of education. Because I feel a lot of the best ideas, or we can't even, like, if you would ask this question 20 or 30 years ago, like, people wouldn't have said, I want SpaceX or the iPhone, right? Like, they wouldn't have really known what to say. And I think that what we really need to figure out isn't, like, my guess is going to be no better than anyone else's on what the next best thing is. But if we had a system where people were able to pursue that better and actually think about things in systems, technology, I think, can play a key role in that, making knowledge available, whenever you want, as opposed to through courses or going to a really like exclusive school or whatever. I really hope that there's some disruption there, because that could raise the bar for all the different major issues that we have around the world.
No, that's a really good one. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So we've got to the end of our facilitated questions, and I see that we do have one question in our chat box, and it's coming from Christy Walters, and they want to know, how did you know when you had the right idea? And if someone has a good answer for that, I will let you put your hand up and answer. Richard, I see you've unmuted. Is that
yeah. Well, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. The thing really is that I walked around with a problem irritating the back of my head for a long period of time, and it was just, as soon as I saw the technology that addressed that one, it was like all the light bulbs went off. So it wasn't like I did a detailed analysis of this particular technology. It was, there were a few high leverage issues or problems that I had in my head that I was trying, I kind of had my radar up for. And when I came across a really good fit, it just nailed that problem for me. And so it wasn't an analytical process. It was that's the one. Love at first sight.
Nice. We have another question that's come in about your thoughts on co-founders or early team members, and selecting them or vetting them. And if anybody has any recent or good experiences with that process, feel free to jump in.
I'll go. I actually had something on the previous question as well. I was just going to say, it really depends on what you mean by a good idea, right? Like, ultimately, if you're trying to create something that, Kelsey talked about starting local earlier. If you're trying to do something that solves a problem for 10 people, that's a good idea. If you're going out to the Silicon Valley and you have an idea for, a new app or something, and it doesn't use network effects and hits 100 million people, it's probably not a good idea for that crowd. So I think I would argue, like, I'm almost 6 years into my company. I'm still not sure if what I'm doing is a good idea. I guess we'll find out. Like, if I'm still, getting called out to panels or something to talk about what I'm doing in 10 years, maybe then I'll believe it a little more. But yeah, it really does. I think it goes back to, why I said education needs to be changed, because we always look at, like, the teacher or the instructor telling us what's a good, grade, or like, did we do well on a paper? And unfortunately, I think that the biggest lesson that I've internalized through my 20s is no one else really knows any better than your gut. Some people know a lot more about certain things, but ultimately you have to, find a way to sleep well at night yourself. So you have to have a gauge that's internal as opposed to external, but you also have to balance that against what you hear from the market. Like, if you're trying to create a global, globally impactful company, and every customer you talk to says your thing doesn't work, you should listen to that. Like, no amount of heart is good enough to overcome that. So anyway, I would just go back to my response on that, to say that you have to figure out what good is and what's enough, right? Whether that be an impact or commercial relevance or just social good. With regards to co-founders, again, no secrets there. I won't actually say much on that, but just iterate that is possibly the biggest decision in a group, and being able to not only bring in co-founders as, you know, equal partners or whatever else, but even just the team you build, you know, your first employee, your third, your 10th. It's really, really important to bring people in that are not just complementing you, but almost like synergetically improving the total value of your group, and like building almost this, you know, West Coast energy thing. Like it really is true. Like even as an engineer, I would say that there is something to be said about, you know, what Napoleon Hill talks about in some of his books. Like there is this compounding effect when you get the right people involved with the right motivations. And so being very, very deliberate about who you bring into the team, I think is critical.
Great. And we're actually at the end of time. That went by so fast. Could I get the next slide, please? And if anybody, any of the panelists have anything extra to add to the 2 questions that we had, I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards and collect any of your thoughts, and then we can share them with the audience when we send out the link to the recording. This slide here is just, you know, coming up with Leading Change this month, so or Globe Virtual. So both events are actually happening next Thursday. So there's going to be a conversation with Minister McKenna and Minister Sabia, and that's happening at 10 a.m. Pacific next Thursday. And then we'll be having a leadership coffee chat at 9 a.m. Pacific. And I believe we'll be including those links in the chat here. Yes, Megan has already posted those. So if those are events that you're interested in attending, feel free to click on the links and register, or check us out on the Leading Change website or any of our social medias. And lastly, I just want to thank our panelists so much for participating, sharing your stories, your advice, your experiences. I can tell you how much we at Leading Change appreciate it. Thanks to Globe Series for being hosts. Thanks to our attendees. It's the middle of summer, and I know patios have opened everywhere again, so there's a lot of places where you could have chosen to been today. And yeah, so feel free to connect with Leading Change, as I said, through any of our social media platform. We have a LinkedIn group as well that you can connect into. And yeah, I think that's a wrap. And thanks everyone for listening in and bearing with my horrible sense of humor.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yep, take care.
Bye-bye.